people that they're living into 90s, even later.
Right.
And they're interviewed on TV, and they say,
and they smoke and drink.
Right. And they say, what do you attribute your longevity to?
Right. I take a little shot of scotch.
Glass of scotch every night before I go to bed, right?
So we should talk about that.
People see that and like, well, it's not so bad.
That's a confounding thing. We have to talk about in spite of and because of. Right? So did they live that long in spite of the alcohol or because of it?
Welcome to today's Vital Discourse podcast. We're so excited to have you today. Today we're going to talk about health and wellness shifts over time. So what's happened? Everything that seems like it was bad for you before is good for you now. Everything that was good for you before is bad for you now. We're going to break this down, Dr. Ben and I, and figure out where we are, where we're going, and what we need to do, what we need to look for. So, Dr. Ben, tell me what you think. Tell me about the things that were bad for us before and seem to be good for us now, and why is that? Kind of just a general overview.
So first we have to look at how do we get information? Is there a stance that our government takes? And I mean, where do we get our information from today? That's shifted over time, right? So when you and I were in school, we used to, read books. I remember I had an Encyclopedia Britannica. Today, it's things like this. We're on podcasts. Any person has a handheld device where they have access to all the knowledge that's out there, good and bad, and they're being bombarded with it all the time. So where our information comes from has changed, and what that information is changed. And so I think it bears taking a quick look at how we looked at our food and nutrition over the past 100 years, just say, right? Because the Food and Drug, the FDA. So what is the FDA, right? The FDA is the government's policy and the bureaucracy set up around our foods and the drugs that we use, right? And also the USDA. What do those things mean? How did they come about? And what do they tell us about the foods that we're supposed to eat? With health and wellness, you are talking about foods and drugs, right? And so the FDA came out in 1906 with Teddy Roosevelt, and that was designed to try to protect people from snake oil salesmen, right? That there were bad things happening, and they wanted to kind of consolidate and sort of say, well, what is good and what's bad? Stop things that are absolutely dangerous from getting into our food supply and into our drugs. It was cleaned up a little bit in 1938 by FDR, and that's kind of what we have today. The problem is that sometimes that information that gets put out by organizations like that can get a little corrupted in its meaning, and it gets corrupted because of undue influence sometimes by the industry that provides us foods and drugs, and the people that are entrusted with our safety. So when you have people who have a vested interest, companies that have a vested interest in selling foods and drugs to the U.S. population that have undue influence on the information that's put out. A perfect example of this would be the U.S. food pyramid in 1992. The food pyramid, there was undue influence from the food lobby, right? In the U.S., we have lobbying, and that means that that you can give money and have conversations with our lawmakers as a corporation, and you can influence the things that they say and the laws that they pass.
Best example I can give of that is breakfast cereal, right? Breakfast, all of a sudden, the most important meal of the day. Okay, now, just so everyone knows, We'll do a really early vital discourse point of the day, and that's completely unfounded. That breakfast is quote unquote the most important meal of the day, but it was certainly pushed by companies, especially those that produce breakfast cereals, and that had a lot of impact on the food pyramid in and of itself.
Yeah, because the food pyramid, I mean, they pushed as the base of that pyramid 6 to 11 servings of grains and breads and rice and things like that. And that's, if you think about that, so if you have a single slice of bread, they want you to have that up to 11 times a day, 11 slices of bread a day. That's kind of hard to keep up with. And that's just the base of the pyramid before you get to any of the levels above it.
And that was back before there was so much garbage in our bread.
Yeah. Even if that was perfect bread, even if that bread was made, lovingly by someone in the back kitchen with great wheat and everything, that's a heck of a lot of bread to be eating with those types of calories. We'll get into that.
To your point, and we'll get to this on additives and that type of thing. But kind of to your point, in other countries, they do consume a fair amount of carbohydrate that is not infused with all the garbage. I'll just put that out there like that. The amount of rice that's consumed in China, the amount of bread that's actually consumed even in Mediterranean countries is pretty significant.
Hey, I'm Italian. Hey, if you 5 minutes after sitting down, if there isn't bread in front of me with some oil that I can rub that bread in, I'm getting pissed off at the waiter. So believe me, I love that.
You got to put a little balsamic in there too, and
a drip of balsamic. If that's the way you are, I totally get
Parmesan.
Yeah. So why is it? Let's back up then. So it's not just the food that we eat and the drugs. It's what's happened with our FDA. So FDA was set up. FDA and USDA were set up as vanguards, supposedly between the U.S. population and the people or companies that supply us with foods and drugs, right? But that shifted so that the companies have maybe a little bit more influence than you would like. Rather than being protective, they were facilitative to those companies. And so you get what we have here. So from 1960 and 1958 or 60 on, what started developing what many food processors and providers call the loophole, which is generally recognized as safe, GRAS. That's another big flash word that's coming up lately with RFK. Is that we have 10,000 chemicals inside U.S. foods that are not allowed in most other countries because of their effects on human beings. What happened is that the FDA started allowing companies to decide for themselves if these things were generally recognized as safe. If there's no concerns, they were allowed to put them into food. And there's no testing done for safety. And that's stayed that way for the last 60 years.
So are you telling me the fox is in charge of the henhouse?
Well, that's kind of what it is, right? And you wouldn't allow that. You don't allow the mouse to guard the cheese, right? You tend to set up ways to keep people with ulterior motives away from the source of production, right? So, or at least the way that they are regulated. You don't allow people that are being regulated to write the regulations. That's not generally not a good idea because they'll tend to write it in favor of them.
So the way I see it is we've got kind of two separate issues here. We've got kind of the FDA issue, which looks, if we take the FDA issue part of it, we're looking more at, should we have certain supplements? Should we have certain foods in our diets because it will make us healthier or it won't make us healthier? Kind of going towards is caffeine good for you? Is alcohol good for you? Are eggs good for you? That type of thing. And then you have the USDA part of it, which is more the food additives. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, so the USDA is actually in charge of food safety. It's the Department of Agriculture, right? And so they are sort of over the U.S. farming. And I mean, I own a farm, as you know, and I raise pigs, and I have a butcher shop. And the USDA is literally there every week, making sure that that we're not developing food in an unsafe environment, that we wash everything the right way, that things are stored properly, that we keep the meat at the right temperature. It's food handling and food safety. They also made recommendations as to how we should eat. The problem is that they basically allowed the people that are providing food to us to have undue influence into what they were telling us to eat, what's healthy for us. And they didn't use science. They just used a wish list of what those companies wanted.
So maybe I actually had it a little bit backwards then. It's really the USDA is really who is telling us, well, the food pyramid people. Okay, let's kind of make it simple.
Right. Well, and they're also, but again, they're the U.S. agriculture, so they look at farms and food handling and food processing from that regard. How do I handle it? What temperature does meat have to be once a pig is killed? And they're being transported, what temperature does it have to be at and stay at in order to be to go from point of origin to point of sale at all times, that sort of thing. That's what you think of as the USDA. The FDA is the overarching structure. Is this stuff safe? And unfortunately, we haven't really seen them being a vanguard of that. Vanguard meaning like sort of a watchdog organization. They used to be a watchdog organization, and now they appear to be, over the past 60 years, acting more like a facilitator, again, of companies to not step on people's feet. So how did we get there, right? I mean, why do you process food, right? So everybody throws around the term, don't process food, don't eat processed foods, right? But why do you process foods? I mean, clearly these companies don't want to hurt us, right? So, I mean, if you hurt people, then you don't have any consumers, and so that's sort of detrimental. But a lot of processed food is recognized as harmful over time. So we should probably talk about where we were in 1960 versus where we are today. I'm going to quickly run through some really scary statistics, right? So in 1960, the obesity rate was only about 10 to 13%. Today, it's over 40% for U.S. adults. The diabetes went from 3% in the early 70s to 14.7%, nearly 15%, 29% in people over 65. Chronic disease, 76% of U.S. adults have a chronic disease today. But now one thing is longevity's gone from 70.8. That's the average age at death in 1970. By the way, in 1900, the average age at death was 40 in the U.S. That's startling. In 1970, it was 70.8, and then today it's 79.3. So it has gone up. But caveat here, in the last 2 years, we've seen a retraction of that, mostly in males in the U.S., where we're actually dying earlier, down to 75. It's up at 80 for females in the U.S. So what's happened is, the paradox is that we're living longer over these last 60 years, but we have more years of really poor health. And a lot of people associate the longer life with, things like reduced infant mortality and success over diseases and heart disease. But what's happened is that I think the food supply is being recognized as not really the best for us. And that's what we're going to focus on today, I think.
Well, I think it's really telling when you see what these numbers are in other countries.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, it's really telling, because the United States is not doing a good job here. Not doing a good job at all.
We did a great job in the first 60 years of the 20th century, and then we seem to be going backwards now. And I think it's because of some of the policies of the food that we allow our people to eat.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're an industrialized nation. You can say that pollutants and things of that nature have their effect as well. But I think, to your point, pollutants aren't making people obese, right? And obesity is probably the single greatest factor that contributes to chronic disease.
Yeah. So that's a great point, because in general, what makes us first world? What is first world? What is third world? What is the OECD? People always talk about we were number one in education in the first world. We were number one in terms of health and infant mortality in the OECD. That means that there's an economic cooperation group of about 40 countries, and they're considered to be industrialized. So all of the first world countries are by definition industrialized. So you would think they may to a certain, to a lesser or more degree than the U.S., but you would think that if that was true in the U.S., it's true everywhere else, and it's not. So we were all progressing together as the first world, and then the U.S. has actually started to decline, and a lot of people point to our food supply. So that gets us back, though, Lee. So why do we process foods? If it's so bad for us, why are we doing it?
Well, follow the money, right?
Well, I mean, look, it makes good sense, and we're not trying to say that anybody is doing anything other than trying to run a good company.
Hey, I'll go one step further. Not only trying to run a good company, but trying to provide food at a reasonable cost
for 350 million people.
Yeah, it is expensive. Good food, quality food is very, very expensive, more expensive than most people can afford.
And most people don't live rural anymore. They don't live where the food's produced, so it has to be shipped in. Most people now live in cities, whereas 100 years ago, most people didn't live in cities. They lived out, and there were a lot of farms, a lot of small farms. Those farms have been consolidated, and now when you transport food and then store it, you have to. It goes bad quickly. You have to do something to it, either temperature or additives, to make it last longer.
So I would say that is the benevolent part of this. Okay, is that from a corporate perspective, that's the benevolent part. Hey, we need to add some form of additive to make it last longer, so that we can get it to consumers at a reasonable price. Okay, and I'll call that I'll give the benefit of the doubt that that's the benevolent part. Now we go to the things that make our food look shinier, our food look more colorful, those types of things.
And be a little bit more addictive.
Yeah, or more addictive. That to me is where the benevolence ends, and the marketing comes in, and the bottom line of the dollar comes in.
Right. And so just remember that when Teddy Roosevelt was building the idea of the Food and Drug Administration, the statement from its charter was that foods must be pure, unadulterated, and safe for human consumption.
It's a pretty general term, don't you think? Yeah. Safe from human consumption. Yeah, you won't die today from it, but
right. Well, that's exactly right. That the idea of generally recognized as safe has allowed the steady inclusion of over 10,000 chemicals into our food supply that are not recognized as safe, and in most cases banned around the world because of known problems. So what are some of the things that help preserve foods? What are the bad actors out there that you see in American foods that are disallowed in most other countries? Just so we can say what we're talking about here. They're butylated hydroxyanisole, the BHA. These are in cereals, potato chips, chewing gum, vegetable oils, cured meats, dehydrated fruits. The list goes on and on. Basically, what people talk about as the center part of the grocery store, not the produce around the edges, not the whole foods around the edges, but they're in cartons and boxes, usually on the shelves that you walk up and down. Propyl parabens, that's really in all the baked goods that we have. It helps them preserve shelf life, but they're in pastries, breads, beverages. Tert butyl hydroquinone, right? The TBHQ in, again, crackers, chips, frozen foods, meats, instant noodles. A lot of people eating the cup of noodles and the ramen that's full of that. benzoic acid or sodium benzoate, also sometimes seen as a potassium hybrid. Soft drinks, fruit juices, things that you think are innocuous that you're giving to your kids and whatnot. The problem, and also phthalates. So we know now the big plastic revolution, right? The plastic revolution was great in some ways because it gave us products, but those products are everywhere now and they're in contact with our foods, and microplastics are extremely dangerous for our health.
I can tell you, just from a little personal note in there, that my family is completely off of water within plastic bottles. We don't do plastic bottles anymore. Everything is glass. Everything is spring water.
Same for me. Everything in my house is glass. My wife switched us over. And we have limited use of the microwave. We don't use a microwave anymore. But if we do, it's always in a glass container or a ceramic container. We don't. And we also are cooking. We don't have anything touching our food that has forever chemicals in it. Those things are recognized as dangerous.
Does that include Teflon for you?
Absolutely. We don't use Teflon at all. We have all either titanium or iron, cast iron, or stainless steel or ceramic for our cookware.
You brought something up, and I hate to get off the point, but you brought up forever chemicals, and you threw that in there, and I have a feeling that some people in the audience might not quite know what you're talking about, because it's a term that is kind of more recent in terms of its utilization.
We probably are going to have to do a separate episode, to be honest with you, on the chemicals that get into our food supply, because it's worth doing, and also who runs the food supply, the agricultural portion of this. We're talking about food consumption today, the FDA portion of it, but the USDA portion is near and dear to my heart because I have a farm, but we're probably going to have to talk about that. So what they mean, forever chemicals, the common name for PFAS, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, right? The family of over 15,000 man-made chemicals used since the 1940s. They never fully break down. They get into your system and your body doesn't know what to do with them, and they're stuck there. And they cause more or less some very bad chronic diseases, increased cancer, increased chronic disease in the U.S.
So imagine that. I mean, people just don't realize that these chemicals are getting into our food supply, or that it's getting into our food just by the way we're cooking it in our home, and it's in your body forever.
Yeah, and it's not just food, though. I mean, it's like it's stain-resistant carpets, Gore-Tex furniture, Scotchgard, waterproof cosmetics, dental floss. Okay, so these things that come into contact with our body.
Are you saying that we shouldn't be flossing?
I think that you got to be careful what you're flossing your teeth with. Unfortunately, again, because our FDA hasn't really done its job in terms of protecting us from these things, right? What's the argument against protection? They always say we don't want a nanny state. Well, I mean, it's not a nanny state. I mean, if you allow companies to give things and provide us with products that have dangerous consequences, you're going to see that in the health of your population. And so because it's not immediate, you don't floss and then suddenly keel over. It's small amounts of it over time that have a cumulative effect. That's the problem. So you do have to have somebody doing the research out there and putting out factual information that you can make decisions on for your family, at the very least. I mean, there are countries out there that ban things outright, and that's a discussion you can always have. But we should at least have proper information instead of information that's filtered through the companies that provide this stuff. We should go back, though, Lee, and we should talk about what these chemicals do that are in our food, the preservatives in general. Why are they dangerous, right?
Well, that could be a whole episode.
So we already looked at the problems from 1960 to today. So obesity, diabetes, chronic disease, right? We're dying from things that we didn't used to die from. We have longer years, sure, but we're starting to have fewer years, but we have longer years from 1960 to today, but we're sicker during that time. And a lot of these chemicals are part and parcel of that, right? So they're endocrine disruptors. What does that mean? People are talking about it all the time. It messes with your hormone state. So that's why obesity becomes a problem. I remember you and I were in school at the same time. I have pictures of me back in high school, sitting in the parking lot with friends or at the beach. I grew up in Miami Beach, and there wasn't a fat person around. Everyone was not only not fat, they were skinny, and actually, if you look at all of us, we all had abs. Now it's a very rare thing to see somebody with a young person. I go to my daughter's school, and everybody's chubby.
Right. I mean, you look at someone that's actually in shape, and you're like, well, you must be working out 7 days a week.
Right.
That never happened. No one worked out back then. There was no such thing.
Well, we did though. We had PE, and we had the president's physical fitness. We always had to do the shuttle run and the 400 and 600, and had to do a certain number of pull-ups and stuff. We all did that. They don't even have PE anymore in a lot of schools.
Yeah, there was no P90X back then, right?
Right. Well, you have to purchase P90X. Back then, it was done for you in school, so you had good food and good exercise, and everyone was just kind of in shape.
That wasn't a plug for P90X, by the way. But you know what? Actually, I am going to go back and I'm going to plug Dr. Ben's ranch. Dr. Ben's ranch puts out the greatest meats you've ever had.
Redfield Ranch. Yeah, and Cherry Block. In Houston, we sell at a place called Cherry Block over in Katy. It's near Katy Mills, and the finest butcher and Texas market. So we sell local produce. We're back to this sort of farm to fork type movement that you see like on Clarkson's farm, and I actually just got introduced to Clarkson's farm. Remember Jeremy Clarkson from Top Gear?
Oh yeah,
yeah. I remember he had a falling out with Top Gear for obvious reasons, but he bought a farm in the Cotswolds, and it's a show for 4 seasons now with his journey trying to figure out how the hell to farm with all the regulations they have over there, and it's resulted in him opening up a pub and a shop, and he's become kind of my hero. I've been doing it at the exact same time, but never knew of his struggles. Watching these last 4 seasons has been incredible because it's my journey as well, trying to figure out all the crazy USDA stuff, all the things that you have to do to safely bring food to market, and then trying to get it into our restaurants and into your fridge. It's been kind of a wake-up call for me in terms of what our food actually consists of and how it gets to your grocery store.
You know, we've identified some of these food additives that are an issue. Let's talk about what can people do to look for these things. You know, obviously you look at the ingredients. If the list of ingredients is longer than your college final term paper, then you might want to look for some of these things. They're probably in there. But what can people do to try and keep this stuff out of their diet?
So look, everybody can do searches today. We're not going to provide a comprehensive list, but we do ask you to look up forever chemicals. Look up additives and preservatives that are dangerous to your health. And these things are dangerous because they disrupt your hormones. They're So if they're frankly carcinogenic, right? In other words, there's studies in animals or people or epidemiologic studies that show that this thing causes cancer at a higher rate. You got to get it out of the food supply, in my opinion. The other thing, if it disrupts your hormones, it's especially dangerous for children. And if you look back at what I just said, most of these chemicals are in cereals, juices, muffins. These are things that kids typically eat. They're in processed foods and fast food. Most fast foods have these in it because, again, fast food means that it's cheap and quick. And in order to do that inside cities, they're not grown there. They have to be centrally stored so that they can distribute this food out at a rapid rate inside cities. And that means typically lots of preservatives, right?
And that's why our kids are shorter and fatter. right?
Yeah, and also with lower testosterone. The testosterone back in the 50s and 60s, normal testosterone was seen well over 1,200 in the U.S., and now in young people, it's 500-600.
I see it in my practice every single day. I see 30-somethings coming in with obstructive sleep apnea or can't sleep, waking up, they feel they're tired all day long, whatever it might be. I do a usual workup. I call it my fatigue workup. And in my fatigue workup, I check their total testosterone, bioavailable testosterone, free testosterone, and it's off the board low in 30-somethings. It's crazy.
Or people coming in, they're for sleep apnea, they're all on testosterone already because of these big companies out there that low T centers, right? So they started doing the same thing you were doing, which is, why am I so tired? Must be low T. And they go in and sure enough, their T is low, and then they work themselves back somehow. Oh, wait, maybe it's my sleep. So you're absolutely right. How they get there, either you find the low T or the low T has already been found and they're on T replacement. But that never used to be that way.
And we already talked about then you get muscle hypertrophy, then your obstructive sleep apnea gets worse. And,
right.
That was a different episode, right? The vicious cycle.
Back to food, though. So the food pyramid was lots of grains and cereals, small amount of protein, fat's bad, right? Back in the 70s and 80s particularly, we said fat is the enemy. Fat must be the reason why all these bad things are happening. If you're fat, it must be because you're eating too much fat. That's basically essentially the exact opposite of reality. So we talked about what the bad food pyramid was. What does science tell us about or evidence-based? What does evidence-based healthy human diet look like then, right? And so if you look at the American College of Cardiology from 2023, the Lancet Commission on Obesity of 2024, EPIC, the nurses study, all of this evidence tells us that you have to prioritize whole, minimally processed foods. So Google these things, find out exactly what you can use open evidence, you can use PubMed, you can use a lot of different AI-based searches to look up these chemicals that are in our food and try to stay away from them. But you want to prioritize whole foods. The less processing, the less changes that have been done to them, the better they are for you. Protein first approach. So we're going to talk a little bit more about these fad diets, but protein should be high. How much is high? How much protein should you have, Lee?
As a percentage of your diet?
So percentage of your diet is a little bit harder to sink your teeth into. I tend to think of how many grams should you have per kilogram or pound of body weight. I mean, I think about 1.6 to 2.2 grams of protein per kilogram body weight, a little bit more if you're older like us.
But you're assuming that you're at optimal body weight at that point. So if you have someone who's obese, for example, and 150 pounds overweight, you really don't want them consuming that amount of protein.
Yeah, you have to look at ideal body weight for height. So you're right. So you don't go to the BMI. That's a great point, man. I didn't even think of that. Yeah, you don't go to the weight that you are. Yeah, if you're 450 pounds, you don't try trying to eat
you don't
that,
eat a cow
that
a
much
day,
protein.
right?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Although that if you want to get it from Cherry Block, that's fine. And then also your vegetables, you can have as many servings as you want of those, but they should be non-starchy. We're not talking about potatoes. We're talking about,
greens,
green vegetables or cruciform vegetables like broccoli. Healthy fats are encouraged, right? So eggs, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, fish, that sort of thing. Those are great for you, and should be consumed. You want to limit carbohydrates to whole food sources and vary your activity level. So if you're a sedentary person, you're sitting behind a desk most of the time, you don't want to be eating a lot of carbohydrates. But again, carbohydrate-free diets are not necessarily the best for you either.
So you're talking like a keto type of diet.
Yeah, I mean, historically, There are societies on Earth that were 100% meat, though. I mean, if you look at, again, talking about The Breath of Life by George Catlin, he looked at all of the Native American diets from Canada down to Brazil, and most of them, 99% of them, ate zero fruits and vegetables. They only ate venison and buffalo. And they were incredibly healthy and lived into their 80s, so with very low infant mortality. Long-term patterns are more predictive of health than one specific ingredient.
I just want to touch on something because you mentioned eggs. Okay. Yeah. And I got to
eggs were the enemy, right?
I know for years I was afraid to eat an egg.
Well, because cholesterol became the enemy, and we tried to forcibly lower cholesterol in people because they found cholesterol in the plaques in people's arteries when they'd have heart attacks or peripheral artery disease.
Just to give an idea of what the most recent information is as it relates to eggs, study in 2025, this is Formisano, review in diabetes, atherosclerosis, dietary cholesterol from eggs has limited, clinically small effects on blood cholesterol and cardiovascular disease.
Yeah, a lot of people believe because it's the yolk of eggs, and people were doing egg white omelets for the yolk of eggs contains all the cholesterol, right? But it also contains massive amounts of lecithin. And we know that helps you metabolize and appropriately use your cholesterol. So getting rid of natural forms of these vitamins and minerals that we take into our body and then reintroducing it in the forms of pills you can sell is kind of a trend in the U.S., but it's not really good, right? I mean, vitamin C is the same way. There are studies done with vitamin C where if you take an orange and you eat an orange, you only get about 100 milligrams of vitamin C. But the effect on the blood, the peripheral blood, within 30 minutes is profound. Whereas if you take 1,000 milligram tablet, you get almost zero effect in the peripheral blood within a half an hour. So pills, in general, pills are not the best replacement for, again, good whole foods. And I think everybody recognizes that. So eggs are no exception. Eggs are back in vogue.
Yes. Definitely back in vogue in the Mandel household. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, and there's tons of studies out there to show that children eating eggs have better brain development and do better in school at almost every age. So I give my daughter eggs.
And then look, it brings up using the cholesterol medications, using the statins.
Everybody comes in, they're on a statin, right?
Right. Everyone's on a statin. And look, there are the most recent study on use of statins really shows a very, very significant benefit for those who are prone to cardiovascular disease. It really does.
But does it show that it lowers mortality?
It shows that in certain cases, not in all cases, does it lower mortality.
That's been the problem, is that it decreases a lot of markers. But it doesn't extend your life. It doesn't decrease mortality, right? And so that's been the big talking point, right? Like, well, what are we taking it for? I actually, as a bizarre, I had a patient come in, and his understanding of what happened at the cardiologist office was kind of funny. He said, well, they checked my blood, and I had low statin levels, so they put me on one.
Oh, my goodness.
But I thought that was really interesting. Like, that was his understanding of it, that there was a level that we should have of statins in our body. And so he thought of it as a supplement. I thought that was interesting.
So, but you also, when you look at these studies, when they say it has no effect on mortality, certain studies will say no effect on overall mortality, and others will say no effect on cardiovascular mortality. And there's a really big difference between the two because, look, you're going to die of something, right? So if you are going to die at 80 from some other reason, okay, from cancer, for argument's sake, and it didn't have an effect on your mortality because that patient died of cancer, that's really not fair to say that it had no effect on mortality. It specifically must say in the study that it had no effect on cardiovascular mortality.
Very true.
And probably more specifically on coronary artery disease. Right, mortality.
Look, our cardiology colleagues out there watching this are going to be jumping up and down, saying, we've got to have statins, and so you do have to take a fair look at.
Well, not the interventional cardiologists. They
not the interventional.
They like when the coronaries squeeze.
Right. So we know whole foods are better. Don't cut out just one piece. Don't cut out all fats. Don't cut out all carbohydrates. Don't go, have what I call a Mediterranean diet, which is a good balance, right? But what about the things like, caffeine, right? Caffeine used to be the devil in the 80s. Is it good for you or is it not good for you?
It's one of those things where there are studies that every day there's another study about caffeine.
Yeah.
It's good for you in moderation. It's good for you if you have 1 cup. It's terrible for you if you have 2 cups, but it's good for you if you have 3 cups, right? I've literally seen that within 1 week.
So what's the consensus, though?
I think the consensus now is that, generally speaking, caffeine has a positive overall effect on health.
Yeah.
When it's used in moderation.
You're going to hear that all the time, moderation.
Right. What moderation means depends on the study. And the studies you look at, it could be anywhere from 3 to 5 cups, depending on the study.
Yeah, if you look at open evidence, which does a great job of giving you a synopsis of the current research from all areas, from PubMed and beyond, 3 to 5 cups or 400 milligrams of caffeine a day per person.
How did I get that one right?
I'm right in there. I'm at 3 cups a day usually. So I'm at the lower end of that. Above that, it can be a bit detrimental, right? What about nicotine? So nicotine was the devil because of smoking, right? So smoking and the delivery system of smoking, massive campaigns when you and I were in med school to try to stamp out smoking. And now I think we've pretty successfully knocked it out of most public spaces, but people are still smoking. And now the new delivery systems, pouches, vapes. What's the consensus? Where are we on nicotine? Is it good for you? Is it bad for you?
Well, it's still bad for you.
Oh, people don't know that, Lee.
Yeah.
There's a huge push saying, nicotine in small amounts is very good for you. The data does not support that, guys. And I'm a Marine, okay? I spent 5 years in the Marine Corps. And out of necessity, when we were overseas, I did a med float. I was over in the desert near Israel or in Israel. And there were times where you're sitting there eating very little food or MREs. We weren't catered like later wars and later conflicts. We carried food in with us, and you're sitting around and everybody's putting in a dip. And I developed a habit of using smokeless tobacco. It was as an appetite suppressant, and also just sitting around, John, with your guys. And I can tell you that it's very effective, and it's also extremely addictive. And it's very hard to kick. I kicked the habit, but these pouches and this vapes sort of have the promise of being better for you than cigarettes in terms of longevity and cancer. But I mean, the research is very clear. There is no dose of nicotine that is seen as beneficial for you in terms of your health outcomes. Where does that leave you with the patches, though, Lee? Are patches okay? If doctors are prescribing patches to stop smoking, is that nicotine okay?
Well, no, it's not. And the point is that the reason those patches are supposed to be prescribed is to eventually get off of them. The problem is they're just used as a replacement, and you're still getting the nicotine, and nicotine at any dose is carcinogenic, meaning it can cause cancer.
Well, it's also, it causes a lot of other cardiovascular effects too. It causes high blood pressure and promotes different problems with your heart. Speaking of which, what about alcohol? Remember, there were the French paradox. Is wine a better way to have alcohol? What's the consensus on alcohol? Is good, bad? Can we go out and party and hang out and throw back some scotch, which I do drink?
Well, it actually depends on what alcohol, right?
Well, So that's a great point. So it turns out, unfortunately, and I am a Scotch drinker and a wine lover. In fact, we're producing wine from Redfield Ranch under Le Champ Rouge out in Oregon. So I'm a big wine advocate, but unfortunately, any alcohol is a toxin, and any amount has a detrimental effect on your health. The things that we found as the French paradox with wines. Turns out that it was a confounding lifestyle factor rather than causal protective. So any amount of alcohol is seen as detrimental now, and so we put that out from the FDA and from other organizations touting it as bad. And so, but I mean, you're going to see on my desk here, I have a bottle of Scotch from a very good friend of mine in New Zealand, and I do partake in it. But again, moderation, there's that word again.
And this is where I think people get confused because, they see people that are, they're living into, 90s, even later.
Right.
And they're interviewed on TV and they say,
and they smoke and drink.
Right. And they say, what do you attribute your longevity to?
Right. I take a little shot of Scotch.
Glass of Scotch every night before I go to bed, right?
So we should talk about that.
Yeah, I think that, people see that and like, well, it's not so bad.
That's a confounding thing. We have to talk about in spite of and because of. Right? So did they live that long in spite of the alcohol or because of it? And I think it's pretty clear now it's in spite of the alcohol. And again, moderation. Any habitual drinking, if it reaches a certain threshold, if you're drinking every day, is seen as detrimental to certain organs in your body. So it means that you're going to live less years than you would have, but you may still beat the average.
It's all about genetics.
Yeah.
But look, we're not here trying to tell people that they have to lead a virtuous life as it relates to what they put in their body, okay? Everyone has a vice, and yeah, we all have vices, and some people, people are going to choose what their vices are. We're more trying to describe, hey, if you're going to pick one, these are the things that you have to at least be concerned about.
Sure, and also you have to look at the effects on you, right? So. Everybody's a little bit different. My wife vapes, and she gets a small amount of nicotine from it. And I mean, she's clearly addicted. She knows that she is. But her blood pressure sits at 110/60, very low, which is surprising for somebody that vapes all the time like she does. And so she doesn't get that feedback of, oh my God, my blood pressure's out of control. What could be causing it? Hey, you're sitting there vaping. And when you stop it, you can see it go down. So everybody is a little bit genetically different, and you do have to pay attention to the feedback your body's given you.
Well, the superheated vapor also causes damage to lung tissue. There are also cognitive effects long-term that won't come up immediately that you would see over time.
Yeah. So again, by the way, moderation is extremely difficult with an addictive substance like nicotine.
100%.
You wind up just doing it more and more. Speaking of which, what about THC?
Well, and this kind of plays into that a little bit because I think there's going to be some studies that will talk about this, but we should do a whole podcast on what has been shown to be associated with Alzheimer's disease and what has not been associated with Alzheimer's disease, right?
Because, so dementia, right? I mean, dementia is a hot topic.
Right. Well, and it's a really hot topic because just like what you were saying before, obesity, chronic disease, dementia was barely a diagnosis we ever heard of when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Right? And now it seems like 50% of the population becomes demented.
And it's happening at an earlier age.
It's crazy. And so it has to be what we're being exposed to or what we're taking into our bodies.
Yeah, and just one final note on alcohol. Remember the 2020 Global Burden of Disease study found that young adults, even small amounts of alcohol. So for young adults, I think the drinking age should stay 21, and people should try to respect that. When you're developing still, extremely detrimental, right? And binge drinking is unequivocally detrimental, right? We all do it. I do it. At your birthday party, we drank a little bit, and I drank a little bit too much. I mean, we do that all the time, but you do have to realize that these are preventable causes of early death, and so you do have to monitor yourself and try to figure out what moderation means for you. But THC, what's the consensus, right? Because all of a sudden, it was touted as, well, it's good for you in some ways. It helps with PTSD. It helps with epilepsy and insomnia. Is it good? I mean, is THC dangerous? Now that everybody's exposed to it everywhere, you can get it anywhere. You can get various forms of THC and its analogs right next to the cash register at most places all through the country now.
And here's the conundrum. There are certain disorders that THC is helpful for.
Those are fairly limited, but they are real.
They are limited. Nausea, and especially people that are they're undergoing chemotherapy,
right.
People with certain
appetite.
forms of anxiety disorders, and those types of issues. However,
but it's predominantly harmful to your health, though. It can even those people that it's helping in some way, it's still harmful to your health, and that's the harms are dose and potency dependent for sure. But it's associated with a significant risk of psychosis. So it's mentally, it can be very dangerous. And in up to 70% of studies, the cannabinoid use disorder, or cannabis use disorder, in 75% of studies, show that it's extremely detrimental to people that use it.
And I can tell you as a physician that young people coming into my office today, it seems like 75% of them are using THC in one form or another.
A lot of them don't disclose it because they don't think of it as a problem or a medication. You're doing surgery. It can take an enormous amount of medications to put you to sleep and keep you to sleep, and it also causes bleeding. I mean, you have unbelievable difficult time stopping bleeding once it starts, and it's because of the THC use, the massive THC use.
Yeah, it is. It really does have that effect. The amount of anxiety, depression, and just an overall flat affect that I see in young people coming into my office, it's scary. It is really, really scary.
Yeah, they don't really have any drive to do anything. It makes you into a sort of a docile, compliant, non-successful person. Just kind of wipes out any sort of drive to do anything.
Wonder why there's such a push to legalize it.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, calm the masses, maybe, compliance.
Certainly we can get into where things get shady with a lot of these things, right? That's a rabbit hole we can go down. So what's the vital message of the day, Lee?
Yeah, so the vital message of the day, first, we'll break it up into food, and we'll break it, food versus additives, right? Vital message of the day for additives, look at the ingredients. If there's an ingredient you can't pronounce, look it up, okay? More likely than not, if you cannot pronounce that ingredient, it's something you don't want to put in your body.
The problem is that they make health foods without additives more expensive. That's because it is more expensive to get this to you without an additive in it before it goes bad. So, I understand it can be more expensive to eat healthy, but it's important to try.
And don't trust the label. The label says natural. The label says this free, that free.
Yeah, read the ingredients.
Read the ingredients.
Because what you're allowed to say on the label has changed over time, and I think it's changed for the worse, where it allows you to be a little bit misleading.
Well, and the biggest example of this, that from my perspective, is that they're allowing fruits and vegetables to be called organic, even if they have this new coating that I believe it was, if I'm not mistaken, it had something to do with the Gates Foundation, Bill Gates in terms of
appeal.
Right. It's sprayed on our fruits and vegetables to make them look nice and shiny, and it's still allowed to be called organic.
And it has apparently some detrimental
serious
effects.
Negative effects. So only get fruit. There's a number, right? There's a number on the label on these fruits.
And by the way, you can't wash it off. A lot of these things that they spray on, because they don't want it coming off in the rain, you can't really wash it off. I peel apples that I get now just because you can't, even with soap and water, you can't get this stuff off. And it's getting into your body, so I peel them.
Only get fruits that start with a 9.
Only get fruits that start with a 9? I did not know that.
Only get fruits that start with a 9. If it starts with a 4, it has the coating on it.
Interesting. Well, I mean, there is a push to try to knock that out of American foods in general.
Yeah, but this just passed. They just gave them the okay recently.
Oh, you're kidding?
No.
That's terrible. Yeah, you can't.
It is. It's absolutely terrible.
So if everyone is saying it must be true, that's not true. You have to do your own research in this. PubMed helps you do it. Open Evidence, Grok, ChatGPT, they can all give you a good idea if there's chemicals or there are food processes that are detrimental to your health. It can help give you a good idea of that, and you should do it. If one study shows benefit or detriment, that doesn't mean that it's a settled science, right? There are studies that come out all the time, and they represent a body of evidence over time. And so try to pay attention to a body of evidence rather than a single study. And again, what is the sort of the consensus based on science of the diet that's right for you? So protein first, about 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of ideal body weight. Non-starchy vegetables, right? Healthy fats are encouraged. Eggs are good again. Avocados, extra virgin olive oil, nuts, fish, things like that. Limit your carbohydrates, but don't cut them out completely, and try and have whole food sources that vary with your activity level. So you're going to be eating, it's okay to eat a little bit more rice and pasta if you're moving around a lot or you're an athlete or you work out a lot. But if you're just sedentary, you want to try and limit that a little bit. Long-term patterns are more predictive of health than one specific ingredient. So that's the basic message we're giving about diet. One thing we should say, though, Lee, what about, and we're going to do this in another episode, but teaser, GMOs. So you're trying to get healthy foods. You just said it yourself. You're trying to get fruits, vegetables, meat. What if they're genetically modified? What does that mean? And what's happening with that today? So we're gonna start that. We're gonna open this can of worms and leave it there and do another episode on it, because it could take hours to tease through this.
Yeah, GMOs are a hot topic.
Yeah, what is genetically modified? What does that mean?
And you're gonna tell us about CRISPR, and we'll get into that.
By the way, just so you know, we've always been genetically modifying food over the millennia, but we've been doing it by, hey, I've noticed that these peas made it through the winter, but they're real small and shriveled, and those are nice and big and fat, but they die in the winter. We'll cross them and
Let's put them in a room together and make a baby.
Yeah, exactly. So we've kind of been doing it in a sort of a natural selection type way through farming. But again, what is CRISPR and how has it changed it? Just so you know, you're already eating things today that have been genetically modified with CRISPR. It allows you to build Frankenstein food. We'll talk about that in a future episode.
We'll talk about, if it says non-GMO, is it really non-GMO?
Is it really non-GMO?
Wow. Thanks, everyone, for listening in. Lots and lots of information. We teased a couple of episodes that are going to be coming up from Dr. Ben, from me.
You treat your health like an ongoing experiment. You are your own laboratory, and you're also your best advocate. So from Dr. Lee and Dr. Ben, happy hunting for yourself, and try to enjoy your diet and your life.
Words to live by.